All right, we're starting Mark chapter 12 this morning. Our last lesson at the end of chapter 11, the question was asked of Jesus in verse 27 by the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. They asked him, "By what authority doest thou these things, and who gave thee this authority," or the authority to do these things? And Jesus, of course, responded by asking them a question about John's baptism. Was it from heaven or from men? And they responded that they couldn't tell. They knew that if they answered that it was from heaven, Jesus would say, "Why didn't you obey him?" And if they said it was from men, then the people believed John was a prophet, and so they didn't want to lose their influence over the people, so they refused to answer. And because of that, Jesus refused to answer their question about authority. Now, he'd obviously already proved his authority as the Son of God, so the question wasn't unanswered. They just weren't willing to see the truth. But he follows that up with a parable beginning chapter 12, which really gets to the heart of the matter. And this parable is going to be followed by two more questions that are asked of Jesus, and then the chapter ends with him asking a question in return. And so we want to talk about those questions this morning. But let's begin with the parable. Verse 1, it says, "He began to speak unto them by parables. A certain man planted a vineyard and set an hedge about it, and digged a place for the wine vat, and built a tower, and let it out to husbandmen, and went into a far country. And at the season he sent to the husbandman a servant, that he might receive from the husbandman of the fruit of the vineyard. And they caught him, and beat him, and sent him away empty. And again he sent unto them another servant, and at him they cast stones, and wounded him in the head, and sent him away shamefully handled. And again he sent another, and him they killed, and many others, beating some and killing some. Having yet therefore one son, his well-beloved, he sent him also last unto them, saying, They will reverence my son. But those husbandmen said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance shall be ours. And they took him and killed him and cast him out of the vineyard. What shall therefore the Lord of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the husbandman, and will give the vineyard unto others. And have you not read this scripture? The stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." And verse 12 says, "They sought to lay hold on him, but feared the people, for they knew that he had spoken the parable against them. And they left him and went their way." And so this parable is really simple to understand, the principle that Jesus is teaching, that he's come into the world and proven himself to be the Son of God and given abundant evidence, and he knows what the leaders, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, and also the Pharisees and Sadducees, and all of those who have any kind of authority or power in Israel, he knows what they're going to do to him, what the plan is, and how they're going to crucify him. He's been teaching his disciples that. And so he gets right to the point by telling this story that is basically an illustration of the history of Israel and of the people of Israel, that God planted them as a vineyard. And remember the prophecy of Isaiah, I think it's chapter 5 of Isaiah, where God uses a parable even in the Old Testament, but he talks about the nation of Israel as a vineyard, that he cleaned out the land and removed the stones, and he planted the vineyard, and he built a fence around it and a watchtower and all of these things, and expected it to produce fruit, but then it produced wild grapes, which of course were bitter and good for nothing. They couldn't be used to eat or to drink or anything like that. And so that was the fruit of rebellion. And so God's people, in spite of all of the blessings they received from him, they rebelled against him. And Jesus uses that same kind of illustration of the vineyard to talk about the nation of Israel in his day. And so we understand that when Isaiah prophesied, that was before Israel went into captivity. And Isaiah predicted that and foretold it for the northern kingdom and then also for the southern kingdom. And they went into idolatry, or rather into captivity, because of idolatry. That was one of the key things. But also just because of their disobedience to the commandments of God and rebelling against his will. the captivity purged them of idolatry. And when they came back by God's mercy toward them, allowed to come back to the land of Canaan, they didn't build, temples for idols anymore. They didn't worship idols, but they became ritualistic and legalistic and self-righteous and all of those things that we see, following the captivity in the minor prophets and in Malachi especially, and what we see in the Pharisees and the leaders of Jesus' day. And so even though they weren't worshiping idols, they were still not living in harmony with the will of God. And so Jesus goes back through their history, and he says that when they sinned and when they rebelled, God would send someone to try to reap good fruit from them, which in that case would be the fruit of repentance, and then also bearing the fruit that God wanted them to, of faithfulness. So he would send prophets, and the prophets would preach and tell them what they needed to hear and warn them of God's punishment, and they would, all the time reject the prophet and turn against him and persecute him, and sometimes that even turned into physical persecution. So verse 3, of course, talks about the first who was beaten, and then verse 4, he sends other servants, prophets, and they cast stones at them, wounded him in the head, sent him away shamefully handled, which again was the mistreatment of God's prophets under the Old Testament. And then it escalated to the point where they killed one and they beat others and then killed even more. And so finally, the owner of the vineyard sends his son. He has one son, and he's a well-beloved son. And that, of course, represents Jesus, who is the Son of God. And God has already stated about him that this is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased. And so Jesus comes into the world, and they treat him just like they had those previous servants or prophets. But notice that he says in verse 7, the Father says, they will reverence my son. God is saying, if I send my son to them, and he proves himself with his doctrine and with his miracles and all of those things, surely they'll reverence him. And God, of course, knew that they wouldn't, but that's the logical, thinking that that's what would happen. But verse 7 says, those husbandmen said among themselves, they begin to plot and plan with themselves, and they say, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance shall be ours. And that gets to the heart of the problem in Judaism in Jesus' time, with the chief priest and the elders and the scribes and the Pharisees. Jesus came as the Son of God and proved himself to be the Messiah. And instead of submitting to him, their attitude was, if we get rid of him, then all of this becomes ours. And that's at the heart of the doctrines and traditions of men, that we can have it our way. We can do it our way. We can bend God to our rules, to our ideas, to what we think he ought to be. We can make the Savior the way we want the Savior to be. And so even though they had abandoned idolatry in worshiping images, they were still practicing idolatry. They were creating God in their own image and the Savior in their own image. And they'd gone so far in their digression away from God in their hearts that they're willing to murder the Son of God in order to keep their power and their influence and their position and authority and all of those things. They would even put Jesus to death and pretend like they did it, legally and in harmony with the will of God. When you think about this kind of plotting and planning and conspiring and the hypocrisy of it and the dishonesty of it, you have to be able to see the devil in it, because that's who Satan is. John 8 tells us he's a liar and he's a murderer. And so they're going to murder Jesus based on lies, and they're going to lie about it, and all the while they're lying to themselves that they're doing the right thing. All of this comes from the devil. This is his plan and his purpose to try to defeat God in saving man from sin. And notice that he's able to work this plan through those who are supposed to be the people of God. These are supposed to be, the people who have God's word and who know it and who know him and should never fall for this, but they're the very ones who are doing the work of Satan. They would never claim to be doing the work of Satan. They didn't believe that they were, or at least most of them didn't, but they were. They were doing his evil deeds because of their own pride and their arrogance and their envy toward Jesus and their desire for power and whatever. And so it shouldn't surprise us today when it's still people who claim to be God's people and claim to love him and to be following him are the ones who are actually teaching their own will and their own doctrines and their own traditions and trying to make God in their image rather than just accept him as he is and submit to his will. The devil hasn't changed his tactics, and he still uses men who have those kinds of attitudes to accomplish his work. And so we have to have our eyes open to that, no matter who they are or where they come from. Even today, if they still claim to be Jews and to be the people of God, but they're teaching different from the gospel, then they're not the people of God. Or there are those who claim to be Christians and claim to follow Christ, but they're teaching different from the gospel, then they're doing Satan's work and not the Lord's. So Jesus understood exactly what was going on here, and he tells it in the form of this parable. And he tells us then, of course, in verse 8, that they took him, the son, and killed him and cast him out of the vineyard. And so again, Jesus knows what was going to happen to him and how he was going to be crucified and killed. And they think that this is their great victory. They've gotten rid of Jesus, and so now they can have their own religion, their own way, and who's going to stop them? They can do whatever they want. But they're, of course, wrong with that. Jesus asks the question, what shall therefore the Lord of the vineyard do? And if you remember the other accounts, when he asked this question, some of them actually answer the question, and they say he will come and miserably destroy those wicked souls. And those seem to be the ones who didn't understand that he was talking to them, kind of like David when Nathan came to him and he answered, correctly. And Nathan said, "Thou art the man." Well, some of them apparently didn't understand that Jesus was talking about them, and they answered correctly. Anyone in their right mind with any sense of justice would not continue to lease out his vineyard to people who did these kinds of things. He would take it away from them and have them punished. And so here Jesus answers the question, he will come and destroy the husbandman and will give the vineyard unto others. And that's exactly what he's going to do. They think they defeat him in the crucifixion, but he's actually going to take the kingdom away from them and give it to others, those with honest and good hearts. And some of them will be of a Jewish background, but most of them will be Gentiles. And that's the others that he's talking about. And then to prove all this with Scripture, of course, he says, "Have you not read, the stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner? This is the Lord's doing, or was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." And that's from Psalm 118, verses 22 and 23. And it's quoted several times in the New Testament, and we know that it's talking about Jesus. He is the stone that they rejected, but God used him to become the cornerstone, the foundation of his kingdom, which is the church. And when all of that happened, it didn't happen according to the plans or the teachings of men. It was very clearly the work of God. And we see that, carried out literally on the day of Pentecost, where God miraculously established the church based on the cornerstone of Jesus' deity, that he is the Son of God. So when he concludes the parable, we're told in verse 12 that there were those present, of course, who understood that he was speaking this parable against them. And they wanted to take hold of him. They wanted to arrest him and to punish him, but they feared the people. So just like they wouldn't answer the question honestly about John's baptism because the people held John to be a prophet, they refused to answer because they didn't want to turn the people against them. At this time, the people are still on Jesus' side. And so if they tried to arrest him then again the people would turn against them. So they didn't do that at this time. They left him, the verse says, and went their way. But even though they leave, they haven't left their planning and plotting behind. And they're going to start this effort to turn the crowd against Jesus. So when they think they have public support, then they can finally kill him. So in order to do that, they began to try to undermine Jesus' authority, and they begin to question him with things that they think will either confuse him or that will cause him to choose a side that will result in a division among the people concerning him. And so the first question came, as we saw in verse 27 of chapter 11, from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Verse 13 of chapter 12 says, they send unto him certain of the Pharisees and of the Herodians to catch him in his words. So they're not seeking truth, and they're not trying to learn anything. They're not, open to being converted. They're trying to catch him in his words, to trip him up, to get something they can use against him, to turn the people against him, or to get him teaching error or something like that. So it's the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes, and now they're involving the Pharisees and the Herodians. And it's worth pointing out and noticing these two groups joining together. The Pharisees hated the Herodians. The Herodians, that's tied to Herod. And the Herods were men who were of an Israelite background, but they had intermarried with those who were not Israelites, either Gentiles, or you remember when the captivity took place that the Babylonians removed the Israelites to Babylon and put other people in the land, and those people adopted part of the religion of Israel, which wasn't the true religion of Jerusalem, but the religion of Jeroboam in the northern kingdom. So they had a false representation of what God's true religion was supposed to be. So it was similar. They had the false side of that, and they mixed it with their idolatrous practices and beliefs, and it became this mixture of all these different religions. So the Samaritans is what they came to be known as. The woman at the well, you remember that she said, our fathers worship in this mountain, Mount Gerizim. Well, they had a temple in Mount Gerizim, and they had their own priesthood and offered sacrifices and had their own holy days. And it was a false, replication of what was supposed to take place in Jerusalem. So counterfeit religion is what Jeroboam started. So there was a true religion, and then there was a false one. And they mixed all that together, and the Herodians, the Herods, had intermarried with all of that. And so there was false religion and a little bit of true religion. But the Herods had allowed themselves to be used by the Romans to govern Israel. So Rome was actually in authority over the land of Israel. But to keep the Israelites from being too upset, they took people who had at least a little bit of Jewish blood in them, the Herods, and let them be the governors and the rulers of the land. And they thought that would appease the people. Well, the people hated the Herods, and they hated the Herodians and those who went along with it. And especially were they hated by the Pharisees, who believed, you had to be an Hebrew of the Hebrews, Jewish parents on both sides, and all of those things. They despised the Herods and the Herodians. But in order to get Jesus, they were willing to join with those that they despised and hated to try to catch him in his words. So it's another picture of their hypocrisy. For all of their, the moral stand that they took, that we can't have fellowship with the sinners, and we don't, like the Herods, and we don't want anything to do with them, and we want to overthrow them. We'll join in with them if it helps us to defeat our enemy, who is Jesus. This is just another example of how hypocritical they were in what they, called their faith. It was really just a tool to keep them in power. So you have the Pharisees and the Herodians joining together. And then verse 18 says, then come unto him the Sadducees, which say there is no resurrection. And they asked him. So not only do you have the chief priest and the elders and the scribes and the Pharisees and the Herodians, but now you also have the Sadducees. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, couldn't be any further apart. The Pharisees believed in the law of God, or at least part of it and their interpretation of it, but they were very strict about it. The Sadducees didn't believe in anything, really. They didn't believe man had a spirit. There's no resurrection from the dead. There's no angels. There's no heaven. They were completely materialistic in their belief system. And so the Pharisees, again, had nothing to do with the Sadducees, but if they could use them to try to get at Jesus, then they were willing to go along with that. So again, all of this is just showing how corrupt the whole system was. It wasn't just a few corrupt people in power. The whole thing had become corrupt. And they would corrupt themselves even further as long as it meant getting rid of the one who was opposing them and who could remove them from their positions of authority. So that's what's taking place here. They're using every weapon that they can to attack the people's thinking and their understanding about who Jesus is, to try to turn them against him. Not because he was wrong, and not because he'd done anything evil or bad, but because he was a threat to their power and to their authority. So the question comes in verse 14 from the Pharisees and the Herodians. It says, when they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true, and carest for no man. For thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. And then the question, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Now, the first thing you have to notice is the flattery, right? They want to ask Jesus this question. He knows who they are. They're Pharisees and Herodians. So obviously he's going to be on guard. So they pretend to have great respect for him and great love for him. We know that you're true, which they should have, but they didn't really believe that. They say, we know that you care for no man, and that doesn't mean Jesus didn't care about anybody, but he didn't have respect of persons, as they go on to say. He regarded not the person of man. You don't care if we're Pharisees or Herodians or Gentiles or whoever. You'll talk to anybody and answer any question. So they're, again, trying to appeal to that sense of justice and righteousness that Jesus always demonstrated. But they want to use it against him. They're not honoring him for being good and right and just. They're trying to use his goodness against him. So anyway, they say that he teaches the way of God in truth, which he did, but they didn't believe what he taught. So what does that say about them? But then the question, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? So verse 15, shall we give or shall we not give? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said unto them, and keep that word in mind, hypocrisy. They're pretending to be something that they're not. They're flattering Jesus, pretending that they respect him, but they don't. They're pretending that they have an honest question that they want an answer to, but they don't. They don't care about the answer really, except how they can use it to turn people against Jesus. So is it okay to pay taxes to Caesar? So the argument was, of course, that Caesar is Roman, he's a Gentile, and should have no authority over Israel because they are the people of God. So can we, as God's people, give money to a Gentile, corrupt, foreign government that really doesn't have authority over us? That was one side of the argument. Well, Jesus' answer, he says, again, knowing their hypocrisy, why tempt ye me? So he takes all of their flattery and he says, yeah, I know what you're doing. And he just pushes that to a side. Why are you testing me? Why are you trying to trap me? And then he says, bring me a penny that I may see it. And they brought it, and he saith unto them, whose is this image and superscription? And they say unto him, Caesar's. And Jesus answering said unto them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. So they either wanted Jesus to say, yes, you should pay tribute to Caesar, so they could say, well, Jesus says that we as Jews and the people of God are to honor and to respect, these wicked, corrupt Roman officials or whatever. Or they wanted him to say, no, we're the people of God, so don't pay tribute to Caesar. And then they could go to the Romans and say, Jesus is trying to start a rebellion. He's telling us not to pay our taxes. They don't really want an honest answer. They think that they can do to him what he had done to them, put them on the horns of a dilemma. Either way they answer, they're in trouble. But you can't do that to Jesus because he's Jesus and he's too wise and has all the answers. So his answer is, first of all, bring me a penny, which is a denarius, I believe is the word there, but a coin that was used for currency in those days. He says that I may see it, and they brought it. It's important to notice that Jesus didn't just reach into his pocket and pull out a coin, and he didn't turn to his disciples and say to them, bring me a coin, but he turned to the people who were questioning him and said, bring me a coin. Because they're saying, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? And they're using Caesar's money. If it was not lawful, and they're trying to make a point that we as Israelites are not to pay tribute to Caesar, then why do you have his money in your pocket? Right? If this is a really big moral issue, why are you going along with it? You're the hypocrites here. They're trying to catch Jesus, but he's already caught them because they're using Caesar's money. They believe that it's okay to use Caesar's money. If you can use his money, you can pay taxes to him. You're a part of the system, right? So you either have to make a stand or not. You can't play it both ways. So he's already displayed their hypocrisy in the fact that they were carrying that money. And he says, I'll need you to give it to me so I can see it. He didn't have any on him, so they're not going to, get that on him. So anyway, he says whose image is on it and whose name is on it. And they said Caesar's. And so he says if it has Caesar's face on it and it has Caesar's name on it, then it's Caesar's money, so give to Caesar what is Caesar. But then he turns it on them and says, give to God the things that are God's. Well, they, as human beings, creations of God, were made in the image of God. So whose image is upon me and you, us as people? It's God's image. He's the one who made us. So what should they give to God? Everything, their whole life. They should submit themselves to God, which is exactly the opposite of what they were doing. They were setting up their own will and their own opinions and their own doctrines and philosophy and everything else against God's word. And so they weren't following, that very simple fundamental principle that if it belongs to God, give it to God. And so he's making the point to them that you're not going to trap me in this question. So was it okay to pay taxes to Caesar? The answer is that it was, because they were part of that system or whatever. It may not have been the ideal that God wanted for them, but it's the way that it was. So they tried to trap him and they couldn't, and they ended up marveling at him because that was a truly wise answer. I think back to Solomon and the people who would come to question him, the woman two women who had the babies and one died and whatever, and his answer to cut it in half. There was wisdom in his answer to draw out the truth. And as great as it is and interesting as it is to read about Solomon, he doesn't even come close to Jesus. This answer here is perfect. And then it continues, verse 18. Then come unto him the Sadducees, which say there is no resurrection. And they asked him, saying, Master, Moses wrote unto us, if a man's brother die and leave his wife behind him and leave no children, that his brother should take his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. Now there were 7 brethren, and the first took a wife, and dying left no seed. And the second took her and died, and neither left he any seed. And the third likewise. And the 7 had her, and left no seed. Last of all, the woman died also. In the resurrection, therefore, when they shall rise, whose wife shall she be of them? For the 7 had her to wife. When you read this question, you kind of get the idea that they were smirking as they asked it, because the Sadducees felt like they had, sat back in their wisdom and in their thinking, they'd come up with the unanswerable question that if there is a resurrection, then you run into all these problems in the afterlife. This woman had been married to 7 men, so when she gets to heaven and those 7 men are there in heaven, which one's her husband? She'd been married to them all. So they think they've caught not only Jesus, but the entire doctrine of the resurrection and the belief in a soul and the belief in heaven. It can't be true because no one can answer this question. So they think that they're wise, and they've come up with this, question that can't be dealt with. But Jesus says in verse 24, "Do you not therefore err?" And, ERR, that's the beginning of the word error. So you make a mistake, you've missed the mark, you've gone aside, because you know not the scriptures, neither the power of God. So Jesus says you're wrong in your question. Number one, because you don't know what the Bible says, and number two, you don't understand the power of God. They thought they had come up with the question that nobody could answer, and Jesus says, without saying it, that's the most silly question I've ever heard. Have you not ever read the Bible? The book that teaches about the resurrection and whatever? If you'd read the scripture, you would already know the answer to this question. And if you understood the power of God, it never would have been a question in the first place. So he says, "For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. And as touching the dead, that they rise, have you not read in the book of Moses how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Ye therefore do greatly err." So he answers the question in two parts. First of all, he says your misunderstanding is that in heaven, relationships are going to be the same way that they are on earth. And that's not true. There's no marriage in heaven. She doesn't have to worry about who's her husband in heaven because she has no husband in heaven. There are no husbands and wives in heaven. That kind of relationship doesn't exist. He says they're like the angels which are in heaven, which is an important verse to remember because when we go back to Genesis 6, before the flood, there are people who try to say the sons of God there were angels who came down and intermarried with human women and produced this race of beings called the Nephilim. But the angels are not like that. They don't marry. They're not given in marriage. They don't have physical bodies. They can't do that. So relationships are different in heaven. And then he says, concerning the resurrection from the dead, and I love how he answers this because it's so simple and it gets right to the point and completely silences them. He says, all you have to do is read where God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to Moses at the burning bush. Well, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had been dead for years, many years, decades. They no longer were living as physical beings here on planet Earth. But God said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm still their God because they're not dead. Even though they were dead physically, they were still living. Jesus says God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And so their error was great. They couldn't understand that most basic and simple truth that God was still Abraham's God, even though Abraham had been dead for many, many years. So Abraham had died physically, but he still lived. He still continued to exist. And so Jesus, he has very strong words for the Pharisees, and he deals with their error in so many ways. But there's almost just, when it comes to the Sadducees, there's not any respect for them. Like, just brush them aside. You can't even get the most basic thing. What's your deal? So the answer was very simple. There is a resurrection, there is a heaven, and things are different there than they are on the earth. So these questions are being presented to Jesus in Jerusalem, in the area of the temple. There's a great crowd there trying to entrap him, trick him, get him to choose sides and all of those things. But all he does is preach the truth. Tell them what the Bible says, tell them what God says, explain things as they truly are. And when you speak the truth, you don't have an agenda. The agenda is to tell the truth. And so you don't fall on either side. You just say things the way that they are. And people hate it. They don't like it because they want you to pick a side and all those things. But that's not what Jesus was about. He was just to tell people the truth. And then you either believe it and follow him or not. So that leads us to the last part of the chapter, and we'll talk about this next time. There's one more question that comes to him, and then he has a question in response. And we're out of time. We'll have to look at that next time. But I encourage you to go ahead and read the end of the chapter to have it in your mind, because there's some very interesting things we're going to talk about. But we'll have to do that in our next lesson. So we'll stop here, pick up there next time.